Thank you for staying, and I know it's late and maybe you're hungry, but maybe I can answer some questions if anyone has any. I do like Battle Royale, but it's not it. Actually, the main point of inspiration is a historical event that happened in 1923 in Tokyo. It's a big earthquake. It's called the Great Kanto Earthquake that happened on September 1st, and so basically 101 years ago. And it was one of the worst earthquakes that hit the Kanto area, which includes Tokyo. And due to the fact that Japanese houses at the time were made by paper and wood, and also it was kind of during lunchtime, people were cooking a lot, and so there were a lot of fires, and so, with the quake, with the fires, maybe, I want to say like 100,000 people passed away, unfortunately. But that's kind of the natural disaster side of it, and there's actually a man-made disaster side that often gets kind of hidden, and there's a lot of right-wing kind of historical revisionists trying to cover up this other side of this event, which was a great massacre that happened. So at the time in Japan, there were a lot of Korean laborers and also Chinese and other ethnicities as well, but a lot of especially Korean laborers in Tokyo, because Japan had been colonizing the Korean peninsula. And so, there was a lot of kind of racist and xenophobic sentiment among the Japanese people, but also the government and the police as well. And after this earthquake happened, there were these really racist rumors that went around that said that there were Korean people poisoning the wells and stealing stuff from Japanese people. And so then these rumors were spread by the media as well at the time, and the police, and Japanese normal civilians kind of banded together and then conducted a genocide, a massacre against Koreans, which also included some Chinese people, also disabled Japanese people, and Japanese people who couldn't speak the kind of Tokyo accent as well, because they were using shibboleth to identify who was like actually Japanese. And about 6,000 people as identified were murdered in this massacre, probably more. And this was a historical fact. Everybody knew that this happened and agreed that this was true until maybe about 20 to 15 years ago, when there's an increasing number of right-wing, especially politicians, but also civilians, who are trying to revise this history, saying it did not happen. And so, the current Tokyo governor, this woman, right-wing woman, has stopped sending condolences to the victims of this massacre, only the victims to the natural disaster. And so, there's a lot of racism and with colonial echoes that still continue today within Japan, and as I was writing this film, I was really thinking about that. And then trying to think through, without addressing this Japanese colonial history, what would happen in the future if another big earthquake strikes. And they tell you in Japan that another big earthquake will come at any moment. And there's really worrying trends about these vigilante groups kind of forming around xenophobic ideas and ideologies today. So yeah, that's what the inspiration is. The second question is, I do not use any of his music in the film. It's composed by Leah Ouyang-Roosli, who's just an amazing composer on their own right. But on the first question, I kind of talked about it, but there is xenophobia that's very long-standing in Japan, and that I think is, as a reactionary force against an increase of diversity within Japan, like growing. It's difficult, I think it's not necessarily everybody experiences racism on a day-to-day basis within Japan, because, for example, Arazi, who plays Tomu in the film, he is very visibly black, but he was born and raised in Japan, and he kind of talks about how he doesn't necessarily experience racism, or he doesn't really, but then I think part of that is definitely due to the fact that, if you are culturally and linguistically assimilated into Japanese society, you're very easily accepted. That being said, I think there is still like a barrier to people who don't look Japanese as well. And that, you know, the ability to whether or not you can look Japanese does come into play to some degree, but also there is like prevalent, very fervent racism against people of Korean background, for example. And generally, if Korean people don't wear like traditional Korean outfits, you can't really tell Korean people apart from normal Japanese people. So, you know, it's not necessarily, it's kind of unlike America in that it's like not necessarily just like a skin color thing or that's very visible. So it's a little bit more complicated, I think, but there is definitely a conflation between citizenship, ethnicity, and like place of birth, like birthright within Japan, and what constitutes a Japanese person. And I think those are very tied with kind of the Japanese Empire and how it operated when it was subjecting all of its kind of colonial subjects to under the emperor's name. You know, because before the war, all of these Korean people, Taiwanese people who could travel to Japan were technically considered Japanese citizens. But then right after the war ended, the final like law that was put into place by the emperor is actually the Foreigner Registration Act, which basically defined non-Japanese people as foreigners, which meant deportable category. And so I think the identity of Japaneseness is actually very rooted in these kinds of policies, and like a thrust to try to develop the nation state of Japan. Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question. Two actors are actually best friends now because of the movie. Very cute. They live together as roommates. Techno's awesome. No, I mean, I love techno. That's like where it came from, obviously. But also, I think techno has a very liberatory history to it as well. You know, I think the space, the techno clubs that before it became kind of commodified in a way, I think were very liberatory places where people were, especially the people from Detroit, were making music for themselves to dance to, and that's just so fun and freeing. But at the same time, on a separate note, I really love subwoofers. You know, I love the feeling of bass like coursing through my body, and whenever I'm in a techno club, I'm like really close to the subwoofer all the time because it just comforts me somehow. And but at the same time, I think the theme of like quaking and shaking and vibration was something that seemed to work really well with the idea of like the bass shaking the space in the room, and so.